Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio, and welcome to the final hour of this show. Okay, now I have a lot of interesting things to tell you about, even in the final hour, because I do always have a lot of interesting and fascinating things to talk to you about related to you yourself. Your health, your mental health, being happy, how to be happy, different things like that. Okay, that's what we talk about right here on Relax Radio with me, Sarah, on the sunrise. Okay, and like I said, I was here all the way from 6 in the morning, and I keep you company all the way until 9 a.m. So, welcome to the final hour of my show. I'm very excited to be here because I have a lot of fun and interesting things to share with you. Okay, so let's actually get into the conversation. Let's get into what we're going to talk about today. But before we do that, I actually want to remind you that you can definitely be a huge part of this conversation. All you need to do is just go follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Just go follow us on our socials, and that way you can always stay updated and be informed about everything that is happening all over the world, not just here in the United Kingdom, but all over the world. And the only way you can do that is obviously through Relax Radio, because we keep you informed, we keep you updated about everything through our socials. Okay, be it news, be it sports, health, technology, entertainment, gossip, whatever it is that you want to know, we have all of it. So make sure you go follow us as well. And if you have any questions that you want to ask us, if you have any thoughts, experiences that you want to share with us, make sure you text me on 07852473473, because that way you can be a part of this conversation, you can contribute to this conversation, and you can share your thoughts and opinions with us right here on Relax Radio. Okay, so make sure you do that, because like I said, there is a lot of interesting and fun things that we are going to be talking about. And let's actually get into what we're talking about right now. Now, it's basically about the pursuit of happiness, okay? Whether people in the good old days were actually much more happier than we are right now, and when exactly the good old days were, okay? Because I feel like this is that's an important conversation to have as well, because normally people tend to think that the good old days, all the way back then, that things were so much better than they're now. Okay, and a lot of people say that things were much easier, things were definitely better when they were young. And we've heard this a lot from our parents and our grandparents. Okay, I mean, how many times have you heard our parents and our grandparents complaining about how terrible society is right now and how terrible people are right now? So then that brings us to the question of whether people were actually much happier in the good old days, or whether they're much happier now, because our brain tends to forget things a lot. Okay, so that's a very important question to ask. That's a very important way of looking at it as well, because back then everything looked actually very pleasant, it seemed affordable, and people definitely had less stress, right? And it also refers to an era that was considered by the elderly people to be better than the current era. Okay, and you have heard your parents, I've heard my parents definitely drone on for hours and hours about how life was so much better back then. And I keep telling them, no, really that's not true, because back then things were so bad. We had world wars, there was discrimination, women couldn't go to work, women couldn't do what they wanted to do. Things weren't actually that great all the way back then. Because if we're looking at all the technological advancements we've had, if we're looking at how much the world has changed and developed, I think it's very fair to say, and I think it's very obvious to say, that back then it wasn't that great. But let's actually answer this question. Let's look at this question and let's see how we can actually answer this, and let's see how we can change things around. Okay, so going back to if people were actually much happier, like I said, this is a form of nostalgic romanticism. Okay, something that people will romanticize simply because like I said, it's you would love to go back and think about back then, and just, oh, things were much better, we could just enjoy ourselves. But like I said, it's this form of nostalgic romanticism. But we need to ask ourselves whether it's a real one or if it's actually a fallacy. Okay, because like I said, our brain tends to, forget terrible things. So our brains will only remember what's good. So obviously when it comes to instances like that, we always have to ask ourselves, is this whole nostalgic romanticism something real? Does it actually really exist, or is it something false? Is this something we've created in our heads to actually, as an excuse for the way we're behaving right now? Okay, now old people actually reminisce the good old days whenever they had a gathering with their friends or their classmates, and even now, when they hang out with their friends, they're always talking about the good old days, right? But the good old days are not always viewed through that rose-colored lens of nostalgia, because the person who's thinking of all those good old days doesn't actually remember how it actually was. And this is and why I'm saying this is, especially during their childhood, they're definitely not going to remember how things were you know like I said, the human brain is in fact extremely unreliable when it comes to long-term memory. That's some of the times, all these good times may not even have happened. You might have been living in absolute poverty. You'd had to share your food, you would have one meal for a day, you'd had to share electricity and whatnot, and you would still think it was the good old days when you had to basically starve yourself to survive, and starve yourself until your parents could earn enough money, until your parents could get enough money to feed you. So that could have been the situation, but our brain is so unreliable when it comes to long term memory that it will portray this situation, it will portray the past as something amazing. It will portray the past as something, something you definitely want to just go back in time and just enjoy all those moments and enjoy all those memories. But the truth of the matter is that's not really the case. Now the human brain, like I said, is very unreliable when it comes to long-term memory. So like I said, a lot of these good times might not have actually happened. Now if we look at this from a historical standpoint, which is very very important, if we look at it from a historical standpoint, things are actually much much better now, right? Because there are definitely less wars than there were before. In any point of human history, there is definitely less wars right now. I'm not saying that wars don't exist, but it's definitely, the situation is definitely much better, right? And world hunger is actually at an all-time low, and people are definitely more educated now, and they're more liberal, and they're more open about all the changes, all the narratives that are changing in the world as well. And we have technological and medicinal advancements as well. Look, that's a reason we found a vaccine so fast for the pandemic, for coronavirus, actually, not the pandemic, but there's a reason why we found a vaccine for coronavirus so fast, because of how much medicine and technology has advanced, and it has in fact extended and even improved the quality of life. There's a reason why mortality of infants and even mothers is in fact very very, much much lower than it used to be. And we also can't forget the fact that back then, when it came to medicine, when it came to technology, that we didn't have all of the improvements that we have right now. A lot of people were in fact in a lot of danger. There was a lot of risk in their lives, especially if they got wounded, or if they were having babies. There was a lot of risk associated with that as well. Now many diseases have also been eradicated, and we're close to being so as well. We're close to eradicating all other diseases as well, because of all the vaccines out there. And also, there's other medical advancements as well. And another thing to remember is that we're much much more connected to each other, no matter where we are, thanks to the internet as well. And because of the fact that we can connect with our friends, our family, because of the internet, that is something amazing as well, right? Because back then, if you wanted to talk to your friends or your family, you would have to wait until you saw them. And especially if you lived abroad, if you lived in different countries, say if you worked in the military and the military was stationed in another country, it would take weeks, sometimes even months, for letters, for methods of communication to reach you. And sometimes, if you were in the military and say if your husband or your son or whoever was in the military, and something happened to them, they either died or they got injured, by the time you got the news, they would have already, things would have already happened so fast that, by the time you get to know it, everything that you could have done, wouldn't be able to do it, because things have already happened and you get the news so late anyway, right? And another thing to remember is minority groups definitely have much, much more rights than they have ever had before. I'm not saying they have all the rights in the world, but you know, that again in itself is a whole progress, right? Especially if we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement or the feminist movement. All these marginalized people, all these minority groups have definitely much, much more rights than ever before, especially even when it comes to LGBTQI plus people. They definitely have much, much more acceptance right now, and that's great because I was watching posts recently, and you can, if you haven't watched posts, do go watch it. It's a great TV show to educate yourself on the queer community. But also I was watching it, and I saw how marginalized these communities are. So that is something that we can definitely be proud about, because life right now, it's not simple, but it's not as complicated as it used to be back either. People have more rights, it's a bit more freer. There's a bit more freedom, people are a bit more liberal than they used to be. So obviously that is very, very important as well. And a lot of the hard intensive labor that we did back then, you know those are in fact replaced by machines, so we don't have to do those dangerous tasks, and we don't have to put ourselves in dangerous in danger as we used to back then as well. So like I said, things do look much better right now. So why is it that we have a lot of people saying, oh, things were so much better back then, right? And are they saying this because of the fact that they can't tolerate that some of these minority groups have rights? Because we know that no matter where it is in the world, there are still people who are racist or sexist or misogynistic and who just love to discriminate. That's just how terrible some people are out there. So like I said, a lot of other people have a lot of people have much, much more rights. So why is it that we hear a lot of people saying, oh, things were so much better back then, but really it wasn't, because people didn't have rights and other people were starving and we didn't have any comfort at all. But right now we do. So why are we actually complaining? Now that's an important question. That's a whole new way of looking at it. But make sure you stay tuned, because we will be talking about all of that. We will be talking about what exactly were the good old days and whether it was actually better than what we have right now. But make sure you stay tuned, because right now we're actually going to head into a small break. But until then, make sure you stay tuned.
It gives them something to look at, and it makes them laugh. It makes them laugh, so that's why I do it. Oh, and it could be a really good pickup line as well. Girls, ladies who ask, "Hey, excuse me, so why are you wearing something so colorful?" I mean, hey, you can you can always have something up on your sleeve. I mean, got me thinking. You want to stand out. Why do you want to stand out though so much, especially with these kind of shirts when you're riding? There must be a purpose behind it, right?
Well, when you say a purpose, Nick, what I do, I wear the shirts mainly, one, because they're nice and bright, so they make me visible, especially if I'm riding on the road.
Okay.
They're
But yeah,
nice,
that's very important, right? Because
very
you want
important, yeah,
cars. Yeah.
very important. And also, like, people see me in like calves, and perhaps I shouldn't be saying this on here, I suppose, but in the bar afterwards.
All right.
And it gives them something to look at, and it makes them laugh. It makes them laugh, so that's why I do it.
Oh, and it could be a really good pickup line as well. Girls, ladies who ask, "Hey, excuse me, so why are you wearing something so colorful?" I mean, hey, you can you can always have something up on your sleeve. I mean, you look like a guy who would do.
You know me too well. You know me too well, Nick.
Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah right here on Relaxed Radio. Now we're talking about which generation or was happier, or even whether the good old days actually were much much better than the days that we have right now. So that's what we're talking about, and we're talking about something very interesting, something that a lot of people talk about as well, right? Simply because a lot of people tend to think that the good old days were apparently much much better than what the world is right now, but I for one definitely don't think that. Okay, so that's the conversation we were having right now. But before we get back into that conversation, I actually want to remind you that you can go download our app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. So you can download it on either your iOS device or your Android device, and you can listen to us from anywhere in the world. Okay, and since we have listeners from all over the world, it's also amazing, and it would be really really nice of you if you go follow our social media, because that way you can keep yourself updated on everything that is happening in the world, right? So regardless of whether it is about sports, technology, health, entertainment, gossip, world news, international affairs, whatever it is, we talk about everything. Okay, and you can find everything on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. So make sure you go follow those. Make sure you always are updated and you're informed about everything that happens all around in the world as well. So make sure you do that. But also, while we're at it, I want to quickly remind you that you can, in fact, text me on 07852473473 to be a part of this conversation. Share your thoughts, share your opinions. I want to know what you think as well, because I think the good old days question is very valid for all of us. Tell me what you think. Do you think that the time back then, back then it would have been much much better, or do you think things are so much better right now? So make sure you do that, because I would absolutely love to hear about it from you as well. Okay, I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your opinions, because Relax Radio is all about you. It's not just me, it's all about you. Okay, so make sure you do that. Now, let's get back into this issue, right? We'll talk about how things exactly aren't what they used to be, that's because we're suffering from psychological biases, and this is according to scientists. Now, a poll that was conducted for UK citizens that was actually conducted by YouGov for this program found that 70% of people feel that the world is getting worse, with less than 10% believing it is getting better. So exactly, so a lot of people out there actually think the world is getting much much worse than it used to be. And it also found that 50% feel their own lives are getting worse, with only 11% thinking that their life is getting better. Now, I think I might know the reason as to why they think this, and I think this is just my opinion. Um, I think it's because of how the world functions right now. The world back then wasn't as competitive, wasn't definitely as capitalistic as it is right now, you know. You weren't back then, people weren't always at each other's throats just to get that promotion. But the thing is, right now, that is what the world is like. That is how hard it is to survive in that corporate environment, because there's so much of competition. So obviously people are going to feel like the world is getting worse. People are going to feel like their lives are getting worse, because their life is about competition. You can never take a break and enjoy that break, because you have to think of the next move you're going to make, because if you don't, you're probably going to, you know, fail in this game of life that you're playing, right? To put it simply, that is what I think. And I think it's because of this that people feel like the world is in such a worse place than it is right now. Okay, now Professor Nick Chata actually said that can this actually, he said that, or he was asking this question, whether this can actually really be right. Because after all, if you really think that things were better, then we should imagine that, you know, if we can roll back time, we should see life is getting steadily better, right? But going back in time, you would actually just see, you know, so many different other, you know, you would see so many different things, right? And most of them would be wars, and the fact that a lot of people were suffering and dying, right? So going back in time would in fact lead us to 9/11. It would lead us to global nuclear confrontation. It would lead us to the two world wars, and it would lead us to that increase in infant mortality, and how there wasn't the life expectancy was in fact quite short. And you know, all the loss of all these technological inventions that have made our lives easier, you know, things like washing machines, ovens, electricity, and so on. So, if we actually go back in time, you will begin to realize that back then things actually weren't as great as everyone thinks it is. It actually wasn't, because, like I said, things were much, much worse. You know, people, especially, you know, women didn't have the right to vote. Women didn't have the right to work. They just had to stay at home, and they had to take care of their children. And you know, it was always considered, and they always thought that the only goal of a woman's life was just to raise kids. So women didn't even get proper education, right? So I mean, I for one, if I had to go back in time and someone asked me, you know, do you think the good old days were better, I would definitely say no, because I'm not that kind of person who wants to have that sort of submission in my life. I don't want other people dictating what I want to do with my life. And the truth of the matter is, regardless of your gender, nobody wants people dictating what they should do with their lives, right? But in the past, that was what it is, that was what it was for a lot of people out there. And I'm not just talking about women, I'm talking about people of color, I'm talking about people from the queer community. You know, all of these people, they were dictated on how to live. And they were said, oh, you know, there are only some things that you can do. If you don't do this, well, then you're not going to get any rights, you're not going to have any rights. And things like discrimination, things like poverty was so terrible back then. It's definitely gotten much, much better right now, because people are more liberal, people are more open, people are more accepting of the fact that people can be different. And I think that is very, very good. So in my opinion, the good old days weren't actually good. They were just old bad days. Okay. Now, why is it? So, if that's the case, you know, if we know that the good old days were in fact bad, why is it that we yearn for these good old days so much? You know, it was just a lot of death, disease, poverty, and inequality. So, why is it that people yearn for these good old days so much? The key point actually in this is that people rate past holidays and other experiences as much more positive in retrospect than they do at that time. Okay, and I think all of us can relate to this as well. When you're looking at things in when you're looking at things in retrospect, when you're retrospecting stuff, you tend to, you know, think of it in a much more positive way than you thought of it at that point of time. You know, for example, you might have gone on a terrible trip, and at that point you would have said, oh, you know what, that trip was terrible. But if you fast forward to a few more years and you're looking back on it and you're thinking, oh man, you know, that trip was really good, but actually at that point it wasn't that great. You know, you didn't enjoy it, it was tiring, you know. So that's a thing. um at that point, you know it's bad, but when you're retrospecting it, you tend to think, oh, you know what, that was actually quite a good experience. Now, this is actually an illustration of the general idea that your life doesn't actually seem good as it is right now, when you look at it in retrospect. Okay, when you look at your life right now, you might hate it, but when you're looking at your life in retrospect, you're definitely not going to hate it, right? You're going to be like, oh, you know what, I had an amazing life, I had like so many different things. And like I said, because our brains actually have really bad our brains are unreliable when it comes to long-term memory. When you're looking back, when you're looking back in time, when you're looking back at all of the things that you used to go through, you're going to forget that you actually went through some of the most terrible situations when you were younger. And you're going to think, I had an amazing life, I had an amazing experience. You know what, I was much, much happier than I am right now. You're going to think that life back then was in fact much, much more fun. But the truth is, it probably wasn't, because if you got sick, all the medicine, all the medicinal and technological development, even the advancements of medicine and technology was in fact much, much less than what we have right now, right? And even other things like, you could have been in absolute poverty, you could have been starving, but you would definitely forget the fact that that happened, because your life right now is better. And then you'd say, oh, what about back then? We didn't have to do this, we didn't have to do that, and we could enjoy lives much, much more. But the truth of the matter is, that is not really what it is. Now, Professor Chater also revealed that people's judgment of the past is also affected by loss aversion. Okay, and basically the status quo bias. Now, if you don't know what loss aversion is when we tend to focus much more on the losses instead of the gains, right? So if you, for example, lose 10 pounds, you would focus much more on the fact that you lost those 10 pounds rather than the fact that you gained those 10 pounds again. Which is like the positive way of looking at it, right? Even though so many good things happen to you, you would always think about all the bad things that happened, and you'd still be upset about it. Now, that's what loss aversion is. And this in fact leads to the status quo bias, which asserts that whatever the situation is now, things in the future will be, or will get much worse, or will be worse. So that is what loss aversion and the status quo bias is, right? So when these two are combined, the loss aversion combined with memory's tendency to filter out bad experiences from the past, and when we actually can leave us, or when we see this world like that, we actually see our world, or our lives, as getting worse. Because like I said, our brains tend to forget the fact that things were much, much different for us. Our brains tend to forget the fact that life back then was actually quite terrible, because of all the suffering and all the terrible things that were there during that time. So a lot of people then tend to think that, oh, you know what, life back then was much better, and they're going to completely forget about the fact that life right now is better, because like I said, you tend to think about what happened in the past rather than what is happening right now. Okay, so that is how that happens, and that is why a lot of us think that the good old days were actually much, much better. Now, half of adults over the age of 50 actually agree that life in the past was preferable to today, compared to just 19% who think the present day is the best. So we can see that there is a significant gap between people who think that life back then was better versus people who think that life right now is better, right? And obviously, there is that significant gap. There is all these different thoughts and ideas, but again, there's a whole other way of looking at the world. Okay, so make sure you stay tuned, because right now we're going to head into a small break. But until then, make sure you stay tuned, because I will be back to keep talking to you about this topic until I have to finish the show. So make sure you stay tuned, but right now we're going to head into a small break.
There's a lot of conversation around who pays more taxes, if it is the rich or if it is the poor, right? When you are basically going out and during a day, you go to a restaurant, you have to pay taxes there. If you buy a car, you have to pay taxes there. So why is it even a conversation that the rich pay less taxes, or the poor pay more taxes? Why is it a conversation like that?
Because it's true that the rich generally pay less tax. A rich person walks into a Tesco's or a Sainsbury's, they're not going to get a different bill than another person, right? They're still going to pay the same VAT on those goods, they're still going to pay the same thing. So that's all the same. However, The differences come in if you can pay yourself from your own company, you can structure it in a way that you pay less income tax through paying a bit of salary, paying dividends, and so forth, and then also deferring income. Also, your pension payments or contributions can be different. So that increases your tax sort of gap, if you want to use it that way. Where a PAYE person just gets paid salary and bonus. And now those are the most highly taxed sources of income in the UK, definitely, in the UK. We've seen it, right? If an owner of a large public traded company does something wrong, irrelevant of what that company does or how valuable that company is, the stock generally falls into a pool of nothing, right? Because in a public company where the stock is traded openly on the stock exchange, the value of that stock is driven by supply and demand, it's driven by emotion, it's driven by news, it's driven by quite a lot of variables over and above the actual accounting or total net worth of that company. I mean, we've seen it, right? If an owner of a large public traded company does something wrong, irrelevant of what that company does or how valuable that company is, the stock generally falls into a pool of nothing, right? And the company may still have value, it may still be doing quite a good things.
Again, but now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Well, I haven't rejected your son.
I want to talk about, how the generation gap, has how much it's changed, especially when you check the youth nowadays in comparison, to people back in the day.
I'd say when I was younger, it was more disciplined. Not now.
In comparison to now.
Not at all. Not now. The way things are nowadays, the younger generation, you seem that they can't accept the word no. If that makes sense. They can't
accept rejection, essentially, is all you're trying to say.
Yeah, they can't accept the word no. So if you, how did I do? Or you didn't do very well, and they get upset. And when I was a youngster, my father used to say to me, because I used to be sport mad when I was very young, well, I still am sport mad, but like participating in different sports. And if I had a bad game, for example, he might say to me, "Bad one to forget." That's it.
Your dad sounds like a smart guy. I mean, yeah, that's the real fact of the matter, yeah.
He'd say to me, "You had one to forget. Get over it." And that was it. So I dust myself down and do it again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Well, I haven't rejected your son. Or daughter. I've just told them that they need to buck their ideas up.
That's the truth right there. I mean, if you think about it, if you check the generations, like right now in the US as well, I've seen a lot of these things as well. In the UK, you get medals for participation. But what's the point? What are you trying to? Yeah, what's the point? Either you win or you lose. People are so afraid to put that whole notion of losing. When it comes to right now, the generation gap is just crazy. How much a lot has changed. Social media has taken control of our lives, and we don't even realize it anymore. We're crippled because of it.
That's absolutely right, Nick. Because, as you said, nowadays it seems that you get rewarded for failure. For the life of me, Nick, I can't get my head around that. Perhaps I'm just getting old and morbid. I don't know. I just can't get my head around how you could be rewarded for failure.
Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. You're tuned in at the sunrise, and it is, in fact, the final few minutes of my show. But don't worry, because I'll be here again tomorrow. But also because after me, we have Sala with the social roundup, and she talks about the most interesting social issues that are currently happening. Okay, so make sure you stay tuned for that as well, because she will keep you updated, she will keep you informed, and she'll also make sure that you're aware about everything that is happening all around the world. Okay, and before I get into a conversation of what the good old days, and whether we were actually of and whether people were actually happier in the good old days, I want to very quickly remind you that you can be a part of our show. All you need to do is just text me on 078 and you can be a part of this show. And I will be so excited and so happy to also know about what you have to say, what thoughts you have, and what experiences you have that you can share with us on this show as well. Okay, so make sure you do that, because I would absolutely love to hear from all of you. Okay, and also don't forget to go follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And that way you can definitely make sure that you are updated and informed about everything that's happening all over the world as well. So make sure you do that. And don't forget to download our app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. That way you can join into the conversation from anywhere in the world at any time of the day. So make sure you do that, because that would mean the world to me also. And also because it's fun. It's fun to join into a conversation. It's fun to share your thoughts, because different people have different opinions, right? So it's always good to know all these different opinions that you have as well, because that way you can actually make sure that you have a better opinion in general. Because when you create your own opinion, you're thinking of everyone else's opinions, you're listening to what everyone else is saying, and then you're making a much more holistic opinion. So make sure you do that, because that's what we want to do right here on Relax Radio, where it's all positives and no negatives. Okay, so let's get back into all that positivity we were talking about, because we were talking about happiness, and we were talking about if people back then were actually much happier than the people right now. So, half of the adults over the age of 50 actually agree that life in the past was much preferable than life today, and 19% actually think that life right now is much better than life back then. So, 7 in 10 people tend to think that the past was better, as there was not so much traffic on the roads, and 60, and they also said 68% also said that things used to be built to last, which is not the case right now. Okay, and I think what they mean when they say that is obviously, in my perspective, I'm going to think of it, or in my head, I'm going to think of it as marriages and relationships. Okay, but this is what I have to say. I feel like the reason marriages and everything sort of kept going, and divorces happened at such a small or lesser rate back then, was because people weren't very willing to come and open up and talk about all of the abuse that they were going through in their marriages. Okay, because I'm not wrong when I say that. You and I both know, we all know that in a lot of these marriages, a lot of these people went through they went through a lot of violence, they went through a lot of abuse, and they didn't talk about it at that point of time, because it was considered a taboo, and it didn't matter what kind of violence or what kind of abuse you were going through, because you had to stick by your husband, you had to stick by your family. Family always came first. Whereas people right now are much more aware of the fact that if you're getting abused, that if you are going through physical or domestic violence, that you're free to leave, that you can actually take certain steps for it, because at the end of the day, no one can make you feel that way, no one can treat you that way. So obviously, people are much more open, people are much more accepting and understanding of the fact that not all marriages are perfect, not all things last, because some people are not actually who they seem to be. So I think in terms of that, we've definitely come a long way. I mean, look, divorce rates might be higher, but what that also means is that a lot of people who used to be in these abusive violent marriages are now leaving those marriages, and they're finally free. And for me, that's actually a good thing in my perspective, because people are getting that freedom. People don't have to suffer anymore, and no one wants to live that kind of life where you're suffering as well. Okay, Now, going back into the past, they also say that having the freedom to go out to play at an early age and the fact that people had more respect for each other also feature highly on the list of things that were better years ago. I don't, again, I don't agree with that as well because, okay, sure, you had the ability to go out and play when you're much younger, and things are a bit worse right now, especially in terms of all those all these weird creepy people out there who stalk children, who abuse children and whatnot, right? That is definitely much worse. But in terms of respect, I think people are much more respectful right now because people are much open to all the different types of people. They're more open about people of color. They're more open and accepting of the fact that these communities have been marginalized, that they also deserve opportunities. And in my perspective, in the way I see it, that's not really a bad thing. It's definitely much better. If anything, people back then, in my opinion, didn't have any tolerance. Definitely tolerance right now is much better. So people back then, they would get so angry, and in terms of justice, in terms of how in terms of how these situations actually existed, those things were actually quite bad. So obviously that is something for us to be happy about, the fact that people are much more open, people are much more tolerant as well. So that is something that we can be happy about as well. So like I said, having the freedom to play out and go out and play at an early age is something that a lot of people miss from that back then. Now, studies also show that many people who are over 50 consider the old days to be better because people were more patient and there was a slower pace of life, to which I definitely agree. Life back then was much slower. Life back then wasn't as competitive as it is right now, and you actually had some time to breathe and think about yourself and take some space for yourself if you are tired, which isn't really an option right now because of how competitive the world is out there. And people also fondly remember the time when their whole family ate around the dinner table and everyone enjoyed face-to-face conversations. So again, that's another thing that was better in the past as well, because right now things are things are so competitive. Our parents are constantly working, and they have to work so much to provide us with money, to provide us with the things we need to live, the things we need to survive. So obviously, this whole eating dinner with their family thing, it's hard to come by these days because of how busy we all are, right? But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, because sometimes on the weekends, families get together, they eat together, and they make sure that they have a little bit of family time as well. Now, something else that other people miss is the fact that the price of gas and petrol was, in fact, much lower, and university education was free, and that the property prices were more affordable, which is something I definitely agree with as well. Okay, things back then were much cheaper than it is right now, but that doesn't mean that things were necessarily better back then than it is right now. Sure, things might have been cheaper, it might have been more affordable, but that doesn't mean in terms of living conditions, in terms of standards of living, the things were actually better. In my opinion, things weren't actually that good. So obviously, like I said, things might have been more affordable, but in terms of our living conditions, it actually wasn't that great. But about 1 in 5 people over the age of 50 actually believe that modern day living should be celebrated. And yes, I think modern day living should be celebrated. We should celebrate the fact that we've all adapted to all the change that is there in the world. We've adapted to technology, we've adapted to all the differences in our environments, and we're actually, growing at a greater rate, right? Definitely, in terms of people, in terms of the advancements we have, and in terms of all the luxuries, or the comforts and things that we have right now, that is how we've changed and we've grown and we've adapted as well. But when a lot of people were asked about, if the good old days were happy and whatnot, and which time exactly was the most happiest for them, a lot of people said that the best decade that they lived through was actually the 1970s, and that was a favorite, and that was followed by the 1960s. So more than half of those surveyed actually claim that they were happier then than now, and 8 in 10 people actually say that life was simpler in the past, and 55% wish that they could turn back time. So that is the conversation. Some people think that life right now is better, some people think that life back then was better, some people want to go back in time and live in that time. But I think what's important for all of us as human beings is to embrace the now. We need to embrace the moment, we need to appreciate the things that we have right now and be grateful for what we have, right? Because even though we have all of these things, there are so many other people out there who don't have those same capabilities, who don't have the same comforts that we have. So it's important to keep that in mind. And it's also time for me to head out of here. But don't worry, because I'll be back again tomorrow as well. But until then, I hope you have a very, very good day.